Book 12. The Natural History of Trees. Chapter 1. The honorable place occupied by trees in the system of nature. It now remains for us to speak of the vegetable productions of the earth, which are equally far from being destitute of a vital spirit, for, indeed, nothing can live without it, that we may then proceed to describe the minerals extracted from it, and so none of the works of nature may be passed by in silence. Long, indeed, were these last bounties of hers concealed beneath the ground, the trees and forests being regarded as the most valuable benefits conferred by nature upon mankind. It was from the forest that man drew his first aliment. By the leaves of the trees was his cave rendered more habitable, and by their bark was his clothing supplied. Even at this very day, there are nations that live under similar circumstances to these. Still more and more, then, must we be struck with wonder and admiration, that from a primeval state such as this, we should now be cleaving the mountains for their marbles, visiting the Ceres to obtain our clothing, seeking the pearl in the depths of the Red Sea, and the emerald in the very bowels of the earth. For our adornment with these precious stones it is that we have devised those wounds which we make in our ears, because, forsooth, it was deemed not enough to carry them on our hands, our necks, and our hair, if we did not insert them in our very flesh as well. It will be only proper, then, to follow the order of human inventions, and to speak of the trees before treating of other subjects. Thus may we trace up to their very origin the manners and usages of the present day. Chapter 2. The Early History of Trees. The trees formed the first temples of the gods, and even at the present day, the country people, preserving in all their simplicity their ancient rites, consecrate the finest among their trees to some divinity. Indeed, we feel ourselves inspired to adoration, not less by the sacred groves and their very stillness, than by the statues of the gods, resplendent as they are with gold and ivory. Each kind of tree remains immutably consecrated to its own peculiar divinity, the beech to Jupiter, the laurel to Apollo, the olive to Minerva, the myrtle to Venus, and the poplar to Hercules. Besides which, it is our belief that the sylvans, the fauns, and various kinds of goddess nymphs have the tutelage of the woods, and we look upon those deities as especially appointed to preside over them by the will of heaven. In more recent times it was the trees that by their juices, more soothing even than corn, first mollified the natural asperity of man, and it is from these that we now derive the oil of the olive that renders the limbs so supple, the draught of wine that so efficiently recruits the strength, and the numerous delicacies which spring up spontaneously at the various seasons of the year, and load our tables with their viands, tables to replenish which, we engage in combat with wild beasts, and seek for the fishes which have fattened upon the dead corpse of the shipwrecked mariner. Indeed, it is only at the second course, after all, that the produce of the trees appears. But in addition to this, the trees have 1,000 other uses, all of which are indispensable to the full enjoyment of life. It is by the aid of the tree that we plough the deep, and bring near to us far distant lands. It is by the aid of the tree, too, that we construct our edifices. The statues, even, of the deities were formed of the wood of trees, in the days when no value had been set as yet on the dead carcass of a wild beast, and when, luxury not yet deriving its sanction from the gods themselves, we had not to behold, resplendent with the same ivory, the heads of the divinities and the feet of our tables. It is related that the Gauls, separated from us as they were by the Alps, which then formed an almost insurmountable bulwark, had, as their chief motive for invading Italy, its dried figs, its grapes, its oil, and its wine, samples of which had been brought back to them by Helico, a citizen of the Helvetii, who had been staying at Rome, to practice there as an artisan. We may offer some excuse then for them, when we know that they came in quest of these various productions, though at the price even of war. Chapter 3. Exotic Trees. When the plane tree first appeared in Italy, and whence it came. But who is there that will not, with good reason, be surprised to learn that a tree has been introduced among us from a foreign clime for nothing but its shade? I mean the plane, which was first brought across the Ionian Sea to the Isle of Diomedes, there to be planted at his tomb, and was afterwards imported thence into Sicily, being one of the very first exotic trees that were introduced into Italy. At the present day, however, it has penetrated as far as the country of the Morini, and occupies even a tributary soil, in return for which those nations have to pay a tax for the enjoyment of its shade. Dionysius the Elder, one of the tyrants of Sicily, had plane trees conveyed to the city of Rhegium, where they were looked upon as the great marvel of his palace, which was afterwards converted into a gymnasium. These trees did not, however, in that locality, attain any very great height. I find it also stated by some authors that there were some other instances, in those days even, of plane trees being found in Italy, and I find some mentioned by name as existing in Spain. Chapter 4. The Nature of the Plane Tree. This circumstance took place about the time of the capture of the city of Rome, and to such high honor in the course of time did the plane tree attain, that it was nurtured by pouring wine upon it, it being found that the roots were greatly strengthened by doing so. Thus have we taught the very trees even to be wine-bibbers. Chapter 5. Remarkable Facts Connected with the Plane Tree. The first plane trees that were spoken of in terms of high admiration were those which adorned the walks of the Academy at Athens, in one of which the roots extended a distance of 33 cubits, and spread far beyond its branches. At the present day, there is a very famous plane in Lycia, situate in close proximity to a fountain of the most refreshing coolness, standing near the road, with the cavity in its interior. It forms a species of house 81 feet in width. Its summit, too, presents the foliage of a grove, while it shields itself with huge branches, each of which would equal an ordinary tree in size, as it throws its lengthened shade across the fields. In addition to this, that nothing may be wanting to its exact resemblance to a grotto, there is a circle of seats within, formed of stone, intermingled with pumice overgrown with moss. This tree was looked upon as so worthy of remark, that Licinius Mucianus, who was 3 times consul, and recently the legatus of that province, thought it a circumstance deserving of transmission even to posterity, that he, together with 18 persons of his retinue, had sat down to a banquet in the interior of it. Its leaves afforded material for their couches in the greatest abundance, while he himself, sheltered from every gust of wind, and trying in vain to hear the pattering of the rain on the leaves, took his meal there, and enjoyed himself more than he would have done amid the resplendence of marble, a multiplicity of paintings, and beneath a ceiling refulgent with gold. Another curious instance, again, was that afforded in the reign of the Emperor Caius. That prince was so struck with admiration on seeing a plain in the territory of Velaturnum, which presented floor after floor, like those of the several stories of a house, by means of broad benches loosely laid from branch to branch, that he held a banquet in it, himself adding very materially to the shade it threw, the triclinium being formed for the reception of 15 guests and the necessary attendants. To this singular dining room he gave the name of his nest. At Gortina, in the Isle of Crete, there is, in the vicinity of a fountain there, a single plane tree, which has been long celebrated in the records of both the Greek and the Latin language. It never loses its leaves, and from an early period one of the fabulous legends of Greece has been attached to it, to the effect that it was beneath this tree that Jupiter lay with Europa, just as if there had not been another tree of a similar nature in the island of Cyprus. Slips of the tree at Gortyna, so fond is man by nature of novelty, were at an early period planted at different places in Crete, and reproduced the natural imperfections of the tree, though, indeed, there is no higher recommendation in the plain than the fact that in summer it protects us from the rays of the sun, while in winter it admits them. In later times, during the reign of the Emperor Claudius, a Thessalian eunuch, the freedman of Marcellus Aeserninus, who, however, from motives of ambition had enrolled himself in the number of the freedmen of the emperor, and had acquired very considerable wealth, introduced this plain into Italy, in order to beautify his country seat, so that he may not inappropriately be styled a second Dionysius. These monstrosities of other lands are still to be seen in Italy, independently of those which that country has herself devised. Chapter 6. The Cameplatanus. Who was the first to clip green shrubs? For we find in Italy some plane trees, which are known as Cameplatani, in consequence of their stunted growth, for we have discovered the art of causing abortion in trees even, and hence, even in the vegetable world we shall have occasion to make mention of dwarfs, an unprepossessing subject in every case. This result is obtained in trees, by a peculiar method adopted in planting and lopping them. C. Macius, a member of the equestrian order, and a friend of the late Emperor Augustus, invented the art of clipping arbors within the last 80 years. Chapter 7. How the citron is planted. The cherry and the peach, and all those trees which have either Greek or foreign names, are exotics. Those, however, of this number, which have begun to be naturalized amongst us, will be treated of when I come to speak of the fruit trees in general. For the present, I shall only make mention of the really exotic trees, beginning with the one that is applied to the most salutary uses. The citron tree, called the Assyrian, and by some the Median apple, is an antidote against poisons. The leaf is similar to that of the arbuate, except that it has small prickles running across it. As to the fruit, it is never eaten, but it is remarkable for its extremely powerful smell, which is the case also with the leaves. Indeed, the odor is so strong that it will penetrate clothes when they are once impregnated with it, and hence it is very useful in repelling the attacks of noxious insects. The tree bears fruit at all seasons of the year. While some is falling off, other fruit is ripening, and other again, just bursting into birth. Various nations have attempted to naturalize this tree among them, for the sake of its medical properties, by planting it in pots of clay, with holes drilled in them, for the purpose of introducing the air to the roots. And I would here remark, once for all, that it is as well to remember that the best plan is to pack all slips of trees that have to be carried to any distance, as close together as they can possibly be placed. It has been found, however, that this tree will grow nowhere except in Media or Persia. It is this fruit, the pips of which, as we have already mentioned, the Parthian grandees employ in seasoning their ragouts, as being peculiarly conducive to the sweetening of the breath. We find no other tree very highly commended that is produced in Media. Chapter 8. The Trees of India. In describing the country of the Ceres, we have already made mention of the wool-bearing trees which it produces, and we have, likewise, touched upon the extraordinary magnitude of the trees of India. Virgil has spoken in glowing terms of the ebony tree, one of those which are peculiar to India, and he further informs us that it will grow in no other country. Herodotus, however, has preferred to ascribe it to Ethiopia, and states that the people of that country were in the habit of paying to the kings of Persia, every third year, by way of tribute, 100 billets of ebony wood, together with a certain quantity of gold and ivory. Nor ought we here to omit the fact, inasmuch as the same author has stated to that effect, that the Ethiopians were also in the habit of paying, by way of tribute, 20 large elephants' teeth. So high was the esteem in which ivory was held in the year from the building of our city, 310, for it was at that period that this author was compiling his history at Thurii in Italy, which is all the more remarkable from the implicit confidence we place in him when he says that up to that time no native of Asia or Greece, to his knowledge at least, had ever beheld the river Padus. The plan of Ethiopia, which, as we have already mentioned, was recently laid before the Emperor Nero, informs us that this tree is very uncommon in the country that lies between Syene, the extreme boundary of the empire, and Meroe, a distance of 896 miles, and that, in fact, the only kind of tree that is to be found there is the palm. It was probably for this reason that ebony held the third place in the tribute that was thus imposed. Chapter 9. When ebony was first seen at Rome. The various kinds of ebony. Pompeius Magnus displayed ebony on the occasion of his triumph over Mithridates. Fabianus declares that this wood will give out no flame. It burns, however, with a very agreeable smell. There are two kinds of ebony. The rarest kind is the best, and is produced from a tree that is singularly free from knots. The wood is black and shining, and pleasing to the eye, without any adventitious aid from art. The other kind of ebony is the produce of a shrub which resembles the cytisus, and is to be found scattered over the whole of India. Chapter 10. The Indian Thorn. There is in India, also, a kind of thorn very similar to ebony, though it may be distinguished from it, by the aid of a lantern even, for, on the application of flame, it will instantly run across the tree. We will now proceed to describe those trees which were the admiration of Alexander the Great in his victorious career, when that part of the world was first revealed by his arms. Chapter 11. The Indian Fig. The Indian fig bears but a small fruit. Always growing spontaneously, it spreads far and wide with its vast branches, the ends of which bend downwards into the ground to such a degree that they take fresh root in the course of a year, and thus form a new plantation around the parent stalk, traced in a circular form, just as though it had been the work of the ornamental gardener. Within the bowers thus formed, the shepherds take up their abode in the summer, the space occupied by them being, at once, overshadowed and protected by the bulwark which the tree thus throws around, a most graceful sight, whether we stand beneath and look upwards, or whether we view its arcaded foliage from a distance. The higher branches, however, shoot upwards to a very considerable height, and by their number, form quite a grove, springing aloft from the vast trunk of the parent tree, which overspreads, very frequently, a space of 60 paces in extent, while the shade that is thrown by it will cover as much as a couple of stadia. The broad leaves of the tree have just the shape of an Amazonian buckler, and hence it is that the fruit, from being quite covered by the leaves, is greatly impeded in its growth. The fruit, indeed, of this tree is but scanty, and never exceeds a bean in size, being ripened, however, by the rays of the sun. As these penetrate the leaves, the figs are remarkable for their singular lusciousness, and are quite worthy of the marvelous tree by which they are produced. These fig trees are found more particularly in the vicinity of the river Acesines. Chapter 12. The polla, the fruit called arena. There is another tree in India, of still larger size, and even more remarkable for the size and sweetness of its fruit, upon which the sages of India live. The leaf of this tree resembles, in shape, the wing of a bird, being 3 cubits in length, and 2 in breadth. It puts forth its fruit from the bark, a fruit remarkable for the sweetness of its juice, a single one containing sufficient to satisfy 4 persons. The name of this tree is polla, and of the fruit arena. They are found in the greatest abundance in the country of the Cedrossi, a territory which forms the extreme limit of the expedition of Alexander. There is another tree, also very similar to this, but bearing a still sweeter fruit, though very apt to cause derangement of the bowels. Alexander issued strict orders, forbidding anyone in the expedition to touch this fruit. Chapter 13. Indian trees, the names of which are unknown. Indian trees which bear flax. The Macedonians have made mention of various other kinds of trees, the greater part of which, however, are without names. There is one which resembles the terebinth in every respect, except the fruit, which is very similar to the almond, though less in size, and remarkable for its extreme sweetness. This tree was met with in Bactria, and some persons looked upon it as a variety of the terebinth, rather than as bearing a strong resemblance to it. As to the tree from which they manufacture a kind of linen cloth, in leaf it resembles the mulberry tree, while the calyx of the fruit is similar to the dog rose. This tree is reared in the plains, and there is no sight throughout the cultivated parts of the country that is more enchanting than the plantations of it. Chapter 14. The pepper tree, the various kinds of pepper, bregma, zingiberry, or zimpiberi. The olive tree of India is unproductive, with the sole exception of the wild olive. In every part we meet with trees that bear pepper, very similar in appearance to our junipers, although, indeed, it has been alleged by some authors that they only grow on the slopes of Caucasus which lie exposed to the sun. The seeds, however, differ from those of the juniper, in being enclosed in small pods similar to those which we see in the kidney bean. These pods are picked before they open, and when dried in the sun, make what we call long pepper. But if allowed to ripen, they will open gradually, and when arrived at maturity discover the white pepper. If left exposed to the heat of the sun, this becomes wrinkled and changes its color. Even these productions, however, are subject to their own peculiar infirmities, and are apt to become blasted by the inclemency of the weather, in which case the seeds are found to be rotten and mere husks. These abortive seeds are known by the name of bregma, a word which in the Indian language signifies dead. Of all the various kinds of pepper, this is the most pungent, as well as the very lightest, and is remarkable for the extreme paleness of its color. That which is black is of a more agreeable flavor, but the white pepper is of a milder quality than either. The root of this tree is not, as many persons have imagined, the same as the substance known as zimpiberi, or as some call it, zingiberry or ginger, although it is very like it in taste. For ginger, in fact, grows in Arabia and in Troglodytica, in various cultivated spots, being a small plant with a white root. This plant is apt to decay very speedily, although it is of intense pungency, the price at which it sells is 6 denarii per pound. Long pepper is very easily adulterated with Alexandrian mustard. Its price is 15 denarii per pound, while that of white pepper is 7, and of black 4. It is quite surprising that the use of pepper has come so much into fashion, seeing that in other substances which we use, it is sometimes their sweetness, and sometimes their appearance that has attracted our notice, whereas pepper has nothing in it that can plead as a recommendation to either fruit or berry, its only desirable quality being a certain pungency, and yet it is for this that we import it all the way from India. Who was the first to make trial of it as an article of food? And who, I wonder, was the man that was not content to prepare himself by hunger only for the satisfying of a greedy appetite? Both pepper and ginger grow wild in their respective countries, and yet here we buy them by weight, just as if they were so much gold or silver. Italy, too, now possesses a species of pepper tree, somewhat larger than the myrtle, and not very unlike it. The bitterness of the grains is similar to that which we may reasonably suppose to exist in the Indian pepper when newly gathered, but it is wanting in that mature flavor which the Indian grain acquires by exposure in the sun, and consequently bears no resemblance to it, either in color or the wrinkled appearance of the seeds. Pepper is adulterated with juniper berries, which have the property, to a marvelous degree, of assuming the pungency of pepper. In reference to its weight, there are also several methods of adulterating it. Chapter 15. Caryophyllin, lichen, and the Chironian Pyxacanthus. There is also, in India, another grain which bears a considerable resemblance to pepper, but is longer and more brittle. It is known by the name of caryophyllin. It is said that this grain is produced in a sacred grove in India. With us it is imported for its aromatic perfume. The same country produces, also, a thorny shrub, with grains which bear a resemblance to pepper, and are of a remarkably bitter taste. The leaves of this shrub are small, like those of the cypress. The branches are 3 cubits in length, the bark pallid, and the roots wide-spreading and woody, and of a color resembling that of boxwood. By boiling this root with the seed in a copper vessel, the medicament is prepared which is known by the name of lichen. This thorny shrub grows, also, on Mount Pelion. This last kind is much used for the purpose of adulterating the medicament above mentioned. The root of the asphodel, oxgall, wormwood, sumac, and the amerca of olive oil are also employed for a similar purpose. The best lichen for medicinal purposes is that which has a froth on its surface. The Indians send it to us in leather bottles, made of the skin of the camel or the rhinoceros. The shrub itself is known by some persons in Greece under the name of the Chironian Pyxacanthus. Chapter 16. Mesa. Mesa, too, is a vegetable substance that is brought from India, being a red bark that grows upon a large root, and bears the name of the tree that produces it. What the nature of this tree is, I have not been able to ascertain. A decoction of this bark, mixed with honey, is greatly employed in medicine, as a specific for dysentery. Chapter 17. Sugar. Arabia, too, produces sugar, but that of India is the most esteemed. This substance is a kind of honey, which collects in reeds, white, like gum, and brittle to the teeth. The larger pieces are about the size of a filbert. It is only employed, however, in medicine. Chapter 18. Trees of Ariana, Gidrosia, and Hyrcania. On the frontiers of India is a country called Ariana, which produces a thorny shrub, rendered precious by the tears which it distills. It bears some resemblance to myrrh, but is very difficult of access, by reason of the thorns with which it is armed. Here, too, a poisonous shrub is found, with a root like the radish, and leaves like those of the laurel. By its powerful odor it attracts horses, and was very nearly depriving Alexander of all his cavalry upon his first arrival there, an accident which also happened in Gidrosia. A thorny shrub has been also spoken of as a native of the same country, with leaves like those of the laurel, the juice of which, if sprinkled upon the eyes, is productive of blindness in all animals. Another plant is also mentioned, with a most remarkable odor, and full of diminutive serpents, the sting of which is sure to cause instant death. Onesicritus states that in the valleys of Hyrcania there is a tree resembling the fig, and known as the orchis, from which a honey distills for 2 hours every morning. Chapter 19. Trees of Bactriana, Delium or Brochone, otherwise Malocha, or Maldacon scordastum. Adulterations used in all spices and aromatics, the various tests of them and their respective values. In the vicinity, too, of India is Bactriana, in which region we find Delium, that is so highly esteemed. This tree is of a black color, and about the size of the olive. It has leaves like those of the robur, and bears a fruit similar to that of the wild fig, and in nature resembling a kind of gum. This fruit is by some persons called brochone, by others malocha, and by others again maldacon. When of a black color, and rolled up in cakes, it bears the name of hydrobolon. This substance ought to be transparent and the color of wax, odoriferous, unctuous when subjected to friction, and bitter to the taste, though without the slightest acidity. When used for sacred purposes, it is steeped in wine, upon which it emits a still more powerful odor. The tree is a native of both India and Arabia, as well as Media and Babylon. Some persons give to the Delium that is imported by way of Media the name of Paraticum. This last is remarkable for its brittleness, while at the same time it is harder and more bitter than the other kinds. That of India, on the other hand, is moister and gummy. This last sort is adulterated by means of almonds, while the various other kinds are falsified with the bark of scordastum, that being the name of a tree the gum of which strongly resembles Delium. These adulterations, however, are to be detected, and let it suffice to mention it here, in relation to all other perfumes as well, by the smell, the color, the weight, the taste, and the action of fire. The Delium of Bactriana is shining and dry, and covered with numerous white spots resembling the fingernails, besides which it should be of a certain weight, heavier or lighter than which it ought not to be. The price of Delium in its pure state is 3 denarii per pound. Chapter 20. Trees of Persis. Adjoining the countries which we have previously mentioned is Persis, lying along the shores of the Red Sea, which, when describing it, we have mentioned as the Persian Sea, the tides of which penetrate far into the land. The trees in these regions are of a marvelous nature, for, corroded by the action of the salt, and bearing a considerable resemblance to vegetable substances that have been thrown up and abandoned by the tide, they are seen to embrace the arid sands of the seashore with their naked roots, just like so many polypi. When the tide rises, buffeted by the waves, there they stand fixed and immovable. Nay more, at high water they are completely covered, a fact which proves to conviction that they derive their nutriment from the salt contained in the water. The size of these trees is quite marvelous. In appearance they strongly resemble the arbuate. The fruit, which on the outside is very similar to the almond, has a spiral kernel within. Chapter 21. Trees of the Islands of the Persian Sea. The cotton tree. In the same gulf, there is the island of Tylos, covered with a forest on the side which looks towards the east, where it is washed also by the sea at high tides. Each of the trees is in size as large as the fig, the blossoms are of an indescribable sweetness, and the fruit is similar in shape to a lupin, but so rough and prickly that it is never touched by any animal. On a more elevated plateau of the same island, we find trees that bear wool, but of a different nature from those of the series. As in these trees the leaves produce nothing at all, and indeed might very readily be taken for those of the vine, were it not that they are of smaller size. They bear a kind of gourd about the size of a quince, which, when arrived at maturity, bursts asunder and discloses a ball of down, from which a costly kind of linen cloth is made. This tree is known by the name of Gossypinus. The smaller island of Tylos, which is 10 miles distant from the larger one, produces it in even greater abundance. Chapter 22. The tree called Sinar. Trees from which fabrics for clothing are made in the East. Juba states that about a certain shrub there grows a woolly down, from which a fabric is manufactured, preferable even to those of India. He adds, too, that certain trees of Arabia, from which vestments are made, are called cyni, and that they have a leaf similar to that of the palm. Thus do their very trees afford clothing for the people of India. In the islands of Tylos, there is also another tree, with a blossom like the white violet in appearance, though 4 times as large, but it is destitute of smell, a very remarkable fact in these climates. Chapter 23. A country where the trees never lose their leaves. There is also another tree similar to the preceding one, but with a thicker foliage, and a blossom like the rose. This flower shuts at night, and beginning to open towards sunrise, appears in full blow by midday. The natives are in the habit of saying that in this way it goes to sleep. The same island bears also the palm, the olive, the vine, and the fig, with various other kinds of fruit. None of the trees in this island lose their leaves. It is abundantly watered by cool streams, and receives the benefit of rain. Chapter 24. The various useful products of trees. Arabia, which is in the vicinity of these islands, requires that we should make some distinction in its vegetable products, seeing that here the various parts of trees which are employed for useful purposes are the root, the branches, the bark, the juices, the gum, the wood, the shoots, the blossoms, the leaves, and the fruit. Chapter 25. Costus. A root and a leaf, however, are the productions which are held in the very highest estimation in India. The root is that of the costus. It has a burning taste in the mouth, and a most exquisite odor. In other respects, the branches are good for nothing. In the island of Patoli, situate at the very mouth of the river Indus, there are 2 kinds of costus found, the black and the white. The last is considered the best. The price of it is 5 denarii per pound. Chapter 26. Nard. The 12 varieties of the plant. Of the leaf, which is that of the nard, it is only right to speak somewhat more at length, as it holds the principal place among our unguents. The nard is a shrub with a heavy, thick root, but short, black, brittle, and yet unctuous as well. It has a musty smell too, very much like that of the cyperus, with a sharp, acrid taste, the leaves being small and growing in tufts. The heads of the nard spread out into ears. Hence it is that nard is so famous for its twofold production, the spike or ear, and the leaf. There is another kind, again, that grows on the banks of the Ganges, but is altogether condemned as being good for nothing. It bears the name of ozenitis, and emits a fetid odor. Nard is adulterated with a sort of plant called pseudonard, which is found growing everywhere, and is known by its thick, broad leaf, and its sickly color, which inclines to white. It is sophisticated, also, by being mixed with the root of the genuine nard, which adds very considerably to its weight. Gum is also used for the same purpose, antimony and cyperus, or at least the outer coat of the cyperus. Its genuineness is tested by its lightness, the redness of its color, its sweet smell, and the taste more particularly, which parches the mouth, and leaves a pleasant flavor behind it. The price of spikenard is 100 denarii per pound. Leaf nard varies in price according to the size. For that which is known by the name of hadrospherum, consisting of the larger leaves, sells at 40 denarii per pound. When the leaves are smaller, it is called mesosferum, and is sold at 60. But that which is considered the most valuable of all, is known as microspherum, and consists of the very smallest of the leaves. It sells at 75 denarii per pound. All these varieties of nard have an agreeable odor, but it is most powerful when fresh. If the nard is old when gathered, that which is of a black color is considered the best. In our part of the world, the Syrian nard is held in the next highest esteem next to this, then the Gallic, and in the third place that of Crete, which by some persons is called agrian, and by others fu. This last has exactly the leaf of the Alyosatrum, with a stalk a cubit in length, knotted, of a whitish color, inclining to purple, and a root that runs sideways. It is covered too with long hair, and strongly resembles the foot of a bird. Field nard is known by the name of bacca. We shall have further occasion to mention it when we come to speak of the flowers. All these kinds of nard, however, are to be reckoned as herbs, with the exception of Indian nard. Of these, the Gallic kind is pulled up along with the root and washed in wine, after which it is dried in the shade and wrapped up in paper in small parcels. It is not very different from the Indian nard, but is lighter than that of Syria. The price at which it sells is 3 denarii per pound. The only way of testing the leaves of all these varieties of nard is to see that they are not brittle and parched, instead of being dried naturally and gradually. Together with the nard that grows in Gaul, there always springs up a herb, which is known by the name of Hercules, or the little goat, on account of its offensive smell, it being very similar to that of the goat. This herb too is very much used in the adulteration of nard, though it differs from it in the fact that it has no stem, and its leaves are smaller. The root too is not bitter, and is entirely destitute of smell. Chapter 27. Asarum, or foalfoot. The herb asarum, too, has the properties of nard, and indeed, by some persons is known as wild nard. It has a leaf, however, more like that of the ivy, only that it is rounder and softer. The flower is purple, the root very similar to that of the Gallic nard, and the seed is like a grape. It is of a warm and vinous flavor, and blossoms twice a year, growing upon hillsides that are densely shaded. The best kind is that found in Pontus, and the next best that of Phrygia, that of Illyricum being only of third-rate quality. The root is dug up when it is just beginning to put forth its leaves, and then dried in the sun. It very soon turns moldy, and loses its properties. There has also been lately found a certain herb in some parts of Greece, the leaves of which do not differ in the slightest degree from those of the Indian nard. Chapter 28. Omomum. Omomes. The clustered omomum is very extensively used. It grows upon a kind of wild vine that is found in India, though some persons have been of opinion that it is borne by a shrub, resembling the myrtle in appearance, and about the same height as the palm. This plant also is plucked along with the root, and is carefully pressed together with the hands, for it very soon becomes brittle. That kind is held in the highest esteem, the leaves of which bear a strong resemblance to those of the pomegranate, being free from wrinkles, and of a red color. The second quality is that which is of a pallid hue. That which has a green, grassy appearance, is not so good, and the white is the worst of all. It assumes this appearance when old. The price of clustered omomum is 60 denarii per pound, but in dust it sells at only 49. Omomum is produced also in that part of Armenia which is known as Otine, as also in Media and Pontus. It is adulterated with the leaves of the pomegranate and a solution of gum, which is employed in order to make the leaves adhere and form clusters, like those of the grape. There is another substance also which is known by the name of omomes. It is not so full of veins as omomum, harder, and not so odoriferous, from which it would appear, either that it is altogether a different plant, or else that it is omomum gathered in an unripe state. Chapter 29. Cardamomum. Similar to these substances, both in name as well as the shrub which produces it, is the cardamomum, the seeds of which are of an oblong shape. It is gathered in the same manner both in India and Arabia. There are 4 different kinds of cardamomum. That which is of a very green color, unctuous, with sharp angles, and very difficult to break, is the most highly esteemed of all. The next best is of a reddish-white tint, while that of third-rate quality is shorter and blacker, the worst of all being mottled and friable, and emitting but little smell, which in its genuine state ought to be very similar to costum. Cardamomum grows also in Media. The price of the best is 3 denarii per pound. Chapter 30. The country of frankincense. Next in affinity to cardamomum would have been cinnamomum, and this we should have now proceeded to speak of, were it not more convenient first to make mention of the treasures of Arabia, and the reasons for which that country has received the names of happy and blessed. The chief productions of Arabia are frankincense and myrrh, which last it bears in common with the country of the troglodyte. There is no country in the world that produces frankincense except Arabia, and indeed, not the whole of that. Almost in the very center of that region are the Atramati, a community of the Sabai, the capital of whose kingdom is Sabata, a place situate on a lofty mountain. At a distance of 8 stations from this is the incense-bearing region, known by the name of Saba. The Greeks say that the word signifies a secret mystery. This district looks towards the northeast, and is rendered inaccessible by rocks on every side, while it is bounded on the right by the sea, from which it is shut out by cliffs of tremendous height. The soil of this territory is said to be of a milky white, a little inclining to red. The forests extend 20 skini in length, and half that distance in breadth. The length of the scinas, according to the estimate of Eratosthenes, is 40 stadia, or in other words, 5 miles. Some persons, however, have estimated the skewness at no more than 32 stadia. In this district some lofty hills take their rise, and the trees, which spring up spontaneously, run downwards along the declivities to the plains. It is generally agreed that the soil is argillaceous, and that the springs which there take their rise are but few in number, and of a nitrous quality. Adjoining are the Minii, the people of another community, through whose country is the sole transit for the frankincense, along a single narrow road. The Minii were the first people who carried on any traffic in frankincense, which they still do to a greater extent than any other persons, and hence it is that it has received the appellation of Minian. It is the Sabai alone, and no other people among the Arabians, that behold the incense tree, and indeed not all of them, for it is said that there are not more than 3,000 families which have a right to claim that privilege, by virtue of hereditary succession, and that for this reason those persons are called sacred, and are not allowed, while pruning the trees or gathering the harvest, to receive any pollution, either by intercourse with women, or coming in contact with the dead. By these religious observances it is that the price of the commodity is so considerably enhanced. Some persons, however, say that the right of gathering incense in the forests belongs to all these people in common, while others again state that they take their turns year by year. Chapter 31. The trees that bear frankincense. Nor is it by any means agreed what is the appearance of the incense tree. We have sent several expeditions against Arabia, and the Roman arms have penetrated into the greater part of that country. Indeed, Caius Caesar, the son of Augustus, even earned considerable renown there, and yet this tree has been described by no Latin writer, at least that I know of. The descriptions given of it by the Greek writers vary considerably. Some of them say that it has exactly the leaf of the pear tree, only somewhat smaller, and of a grass-green color. Others again say that it has a rather reddish leaf, like that of the mastic, and others, that it is a kind of terebinth, and that King Antigonus, to whom a branch of it was brought, was of that opinion. King Juba, in the work which he wrote and dedicated to Caius Caesar, the son of Augustus, who was inflamed by the widespread renown of Arabia, states that the tree has a spiral stem, and that the branches bear a considerable resemblance to those of the Pontic maple, while it secretes a sort of juice very similar to that of the almond tree. Such, he says, is the appearance of the tree as seen in Carmania and Egypt, where it was introduced and planted under the auspices of the Ptolemies when reigning there. It is well known that it has a bark not unlike that of the laurel, and indeed, some persons have asserted that their leaves are similar. At all events, such was the case with the tree as it grew at Sardes, for the kings of Asia also took considerable care to have it planted there. The ambassadors who in my time have come to Rome from Arabia have made all these matters more uncertain, even than they were before, a thing at which we may justly be surprised, seeing that some sprigs even of the incense tree have been brought among us, from which we have some reason to conclude that the parent tree is round and tapering, and that it puts forth its shoots from a trunk that is entirely free from knots. Chapter 32. Various kinds of frankincense. In former times, when they had fewer opportunities of selling it, they used to gather the frankincense only once a year, but at the present day, as there is a much greater demand for it, there is a second crop as well. The first, and what we may call the natural vintage, takes place about the rising of the dog-star, a period when the heat is most intense, on which occasion they cut the tree where the bark appears to be the fullest of juice, and extremely thin, from being distended to the greatest extent. The incision thus made is gradually extended, but nothing is removed, the consequence of which is that an unctuous foam oozes forth, which gradually coagulates and thickens. When the nature of the locality requires it, this juice is received upon mats of palm leaves, though in some places the space around the tree is made hard by being well rammed down for the purpose. The frankincense that is gathered after the former method is in the purest state, though that which falls on the ground is the heaviest in weight. That which adheres to the tree is pared off with an iron instrument, which accounts for its being found mingled with pieces of bark. The forest is allotted in certain portions, and such is the mutual probity of the owners, that it is quite safe from all depredation. Indeed, there is no one left to watch the trees after the incisions are made, and yet no one is ever known to plunder his neighbor. But, by Hercules! At Alexandria, where the incense is dressed for sale, the workshops can never be guarded with sufficient care. A seal is even placed upon the workmen's aprons, and a mask put upon the head, or else a net with very close meshes, while the people are stripped naked before they are allowed to leave work. So true it is that punishments afford less security among us than is to be found by these Arabians amid their woods and forests. The incense which has accumulated during the summer is gathered in the autumn. It is the purest of all, and is of a white color. The second gathering takes place in spring, incisions being made in the bark for that purpose during the winter. This, however, is of a red color, and not to be compared with the other incense. The first, or superior kind of incense, is known as carphiathum, the latter is called dithiathum. It is thought also that the incense which is gathered from the tree while young is the whitest, though the produce of the old trees has the most powerful smell. Some persons, too, have an impression that the best incense is found in the islands, but Juber asserts that no incense at all is grown there. That incense which has hung suspended in globular drops is known to us as male frankincense, although it is mostly the case that we do not use the term male except in contradistinction to the word female. It has been attributed, however, to religious scruples, that the name of the other sex was not employed as a denomination for this substance. Some persons, again, are of opinion that the male frankincense has been so called from its resemblance to the testes of the male. The incense, however, that is the most esteemed of all is that which is mammose or breast-shaped, and is produced when one drop has stopped short, and another, following close upon it, has adhered and united with it. I find it stated that one of these lumps used to make quite a handful, at a time when men displayed less eagerness to gather it, and it was allowed more time to accumulate. The Greeks call such lumps as these by the name of stegonia and atomus, while the smaller pieces are called orobia. The fragments which are broken off by shaking the tree are known to us as manna. Even at the present day, however, there are drops found which weigh 1/3 of a mina, or, in other words, 28 denarii. Alexander the Great, when a boy, was on one occasion loading the altars with frankincense with the greatest prodigality, upon which his tutor Leonides remarked to him that it would be time to worship the gods in such a lavish manner as that, when he had conquered the countries that produced the frankincense. After Alexander had conquered Arabia, he dispatched to Leonides a ship freighted with frankincense, and sent him word, requesting that he would now worship the gods without stint or limit. The incense, after being collected, is carried on camels' backs to Sabota, at which place a single gate is left open for its admission. To deviate from the high road while conveying it, the laws have made a capital offense. At this place the priests take by measure, and not by weight, a 10th part in honor of their god, whom they call Sabbath. Indeed, it is not allowable to dispose of it before this has been done. Out of this 10th the public expenses are defrayed, for the divinity generously entertains all those strangers who have made a certain number of days' journey in coming thither. The incense can only be exported through the country of the Jabanati, and for this reason it is that a certain tax is paid to their king as well. Thamna, which is their capital, is distant from Gaza, a city of Judea, on the shores of our sea, 4,436 miles, the distance being divided into 65 days' journey by camel. There are certain portions also of the frankincense which are given to the priests and the king's secretaries. And in addition to these, the keepers of it, as well as the soldiers who guard it, the gatekeepers, and various other employees, have their share as well. And then besides, all along the route, there is at one place water to pay for, at another fodder, lodging at the stations, and various taxes and imposts besides, the consequence of which is, that the expense for each camel before it arrives at the shores of our sea is 688 denarii. After all this, too, there are certain payments still to be made to the farmers of the revenue of our empire. Hence it is that a pound of the best frankincense sells at 6 denarii, the second quality 5, and the third 3. Among us, it is adulterated with drops of white resin, a substance which bears a strong resemblance to it, but the fraud may be easily detected by the methods which have been already mentioned. It is tested by the following qualities: its whiteness, size, brittleness, and the readiness with which it takes fire when placed on heated coals, in addition to which, it should not give to the pressure of the teeth, but from its natural brittleness crumble all to pieces. Chapter 33. Myrrh. According to some authors, myrrh is the produce of a tree that grows in the same forests as the incense tree, though most say that they grow in different places. But the fact is that myrrh grows in many parts of Arabia, as will be seen when we come to speak of the several varieties of it. A sort that is highly esteemed is brought from the islands also, and the Sabai even cross the sea to procure it in the country of the troglodyte. It is grown also by being transplanted, and when thus cultivated is greatly preferred to that which is grown in the forests. The plant is greatly improved by raking and bearing the roots. Indeed, the cooler the roots are kept, the better it is. Chapter 34. The trees which produce myrrh. The tree grows to the height of 5 cubits, and has thorns upon it. The trunk is hard and spiral, and thicker than that of the incense tree, and much more so at the root than at the upper part of the tree. Some authors have said that the bark is smooth like that of the arbuate, others, that it is rough and covered with thorns. It has the leaf of the olive but more wavy, with sharp points at the edges. Juba says, however, that it resembles the leaf of the aliasatrum. Some again say that it resembles the juniper, only that it is rougher and bristling with thorns, and that the leaves are of a rounder shape, though they have exactly the taste of the juniper. There have been some writers who have incorrectly asserted that both myrrh and frankincense are the product of the same tree. Chapter 35. The nature and various kinds of myrrh. Incisions are made in the myrrh tree also twice a year, and at the same season as in the incense tree, but in the case of the myrrh tree they are all made the way up from the root as far as the branches which are able to bear it. The tree spontaneously exudes, before the incision is made, a liquid which bears the name of stacte, and to which there is no myrrh that is superior. Second only in quality to this is the cultivated myrrh, of the wild or forest kind. The best is that which is gathered in summer. They give no tithes of myrrh to the god, because it is the produce of other countries as well, but the growers pay the fourth part of it to the king of the Gebanati. Myrrh is bought up indiscriminately by the common people, and then packed into bags, but our perfumers separate it without any difficulty, the principal tests of its goodness being its unctuousness and its aromatic smell. There are several kinds of myrrh. The first among the wild myrrhs is the troglodytic, and the next are the Manian, which includes the atramitic and that of Ozoritis, in the kingdom of the Gebanati. A third kind is the Dionytic, and a fourth is the mixed myrrh or all sorts. A fifth again is the Sambracenian, which is brought from a city in the kingdom of the Sabai, near the sea, and a sixth is known by the name of Dusaritic. There is a white myrrh also, which is produced in only one spot, and is carried for sale to the city of Messalam. The troglodytic myrrh is tested by its unctuousness, and its peculiarly dry appearance. It has also a dirty, rough look with it, but is more acrid than the other kinds. The Sambracenian myrrh has none of these faults, and is more sightly in appearance than any of them, though it is far from being so powerful. In general, however, the proof of its goodness consists in its being separated in little pieces of uneven shape, formed by the concretion of a whitish juice, which dries up little by little. When broken it ought to exhibit white marks like the fingernails, and to be slightly bitter to the taste. That of second quality is of a mottled appearance within, while of worse quality is that which is of a black color within. The very worst of all is that which is black on the outside as well. The price of myrrh varies according to the number of purchasers. Stacte is sold at prices which vary from 3 denarii to 40 per pound, while the very highest price of the cultivated myrrh is 11 denarii. Erythraean myrrh, the same, it is pretended, as Arabian myrrh, is 16 denarii per pound, troglodytic also, is 16 denarii, and that known as odororia or odoriferous myrrh, sells at 14. Myrrh is adulterated with pieces of mastic and other gums. It is also drugged with the juice of wild cucumber, in order to produce a certain bitterness, and with litharge for the purpose of increasing its weight. Other sophistications may be discovered on tasting it, and the gum will adhere to the teeth. But the cleverest mode of adulterating it is with Indian myrrh, a substance which is gathered from a certain prickly shrub which grows there. This is the only thing that India produces of worse quality than the corresponding produce of other countries. They may, however, be very easily distinguished, that of India being so very much inferior. Chapter 36. Mastic. The transition, therefore, is very easy to mastic, which grows upon another prickly shrub of India and Arabia, known by the name of lena. Of mastic as well there are 2 different kinds, for in Asia and Greece there is also found a herb which puts forth leaves from the root, and bears a thistly head, resembling an apple and full of seeds. Upon an incision being made in the upper part of this plant drops distill from it, which can hardly be distinguished from the genuine mastic. There is, again, a third sort, found in Pontus, but more like bitumen than anything else. The most esteemed, however, of all these, is the white mastic of Chios, the price of which is 20 denarii per pound, while the black mastic sells at 12. It is said that the mastic of Chios exudes from the lentisk in the form of a sort of gum. Like frankincense, it is adulterated with resin. Chapter 37. Ladanum and Stobilen. Arabia, too, still boasts of her ladanum. Many writers have stated that this substance is the fortuitous result of an accidental injury inflicted upon a certain odoriferous plant, under the following circumstances. The goat, they say, which is in general an animal that is extremely mischievous to foliage, is particularly fond of the shrubs that are odoriferous, as if, indeed, it were really sensible of the value that is set upon them. Hence it is that as the animal crops the sprouting shoots of the branches which are swollen with a liquid juice of remarkable sweetness, these juices drop and become mingled together, and are then wiped up by the shaggy hairs of its unlucky beard. Being there mingled with the dust, these juices form knots and tufts, and are then dried by the sun, and hence the circumstance is accounted for that in the ladanum which is imported by us we find goats' hairs. This, however, we are told, occurs nowhere but among the Nabatii, a people of Arabia, who border upon Syria. The more recent writers call this substance by the name of stobalin, and state that in the forests of Arabia the trees are broken by the goats while browsing, and that the juices in consequence adhere to their shaggy hair, but the genuine ladanum, they assure us, comes from the island of Cyprus. I make mention of this in order that every kind of odoriferous plant may be taken some notice of, even though incidentally and not in the order of their respective localities. They say also that this Cyprian ladanum is collected in the same manner as the other, and that it forms a kind of greasy substance or oesopum, which adheres to the beards and shaggy legs of the goats, but that it is produced from the flowers of the ground ivy, which they have nibbled when in quest of their morning food, a time at which the whole island is covered with dew. After this, they say, when the fogs are dispersed by the sun, the dust adheres to their wet coats, and the ladanum is formed, which is afterwards taken off of them with a comb. There are some authors who give to the plant of Cyprus, from which it is made, the name of leda, and hence it is that we find it also called ledanum. They say also that a viscous substance settles upon this plant, and that by the aid of strings wound around it, its leaves are rolled into balls, from which a kind of cake is made. Hence it is that in Cyprus, as well as in Arabia, there are two kinds of ladanum, the one natural and mingled with earth, and the other artificial. The former is friable, while the latter is of a viscous nature. It is stated also that this substance is the produce of a shrub originally found in Carmania, and propagated by plants, by order of the Ptolemies, in the parts beyond Egypt, while other authorities are found, which say that it grows on the incense tree, and is gathered like gum, from incisions made in the bark, after which it is collected in bags of goatskin. That of the most approved quality, sells at the rate of 40 asses per pound. Ladanum is adulterated with myrtle berries, and filth taken from the fleeces of other animals besides the goat. If genuine, it ought to have a wild and acrid smell, in some measure redolent of the desert places where it is produced. It is dry and parched in appearance, but becomes soft the moment it is touched. When ignited, it gives a brilliant flame, and emits a powerful but pleasant odor. If mixed with myrtle berries, its spurious quality is immediately discovered by their crackling in the fire. In addition to this, the genuine ladanum has more grits, or stony particles, adhering to it, than dust. Chapter 38. In Yemen. In Arabia, too, the olive tree distills a sort of tear, with which the Indians make a medicament, known by the Greeks as inhemen. It is said to be of wonderful efficacy in contracting and healing wounds and sores. These trees, situate on the coasts there, are covered by the sea at high water, without the berries suffering the slightest injury, although it is a well-known fact that the salt collects upon the leaves. All these trees are peculiar to Arabia, but it has some few besides in common with other countries, of which we shall make mention elsewhere, the kinds growing in Arabia being of inferior quality. The people of that country have a wonderful regard for the perfumes of foreign parts, and import them from places at a considerable distance. So soon are men sated with what they have of their own, and so covetous are they of what belongs to others. Chapter 39. The tree called Bratus. Hence it is, that they import from the country of the Elame the wood of a tree called Bratus, which is similar in appearance to a spreading cypress. Its branches are of a whitish color, and the wood, while burning, emits a pleasant odor. It is highly spoken of by Claudius Caesar in his history, for its marvelous properties. He states that the Parthians sprinkle the leaves of it in their drink, that its smell closely resembles that of the cedar, and that the smoke of it is efficacious in counteracting the effects of smoke emitted by other wood. This tree grows in the countries that lie beyond the Pass Tigris, in the territory of the city of Sitoka, upon Mount Zagros. Chapter 40. The tree called Stobrum. The Arabians import from Carmania also the wood of a tree called Stobrum, which they employ in fumigations, by steeping it in palm wine, and then setting fire to it. The odor first ascends to the ceiling, and then descends in volumes to the floor. It is very agreeable, but is apt to cause an oppression of the head, though unattended with pain. It is used for promoting sleep in persons when ill. For these branches of commerce, they have opened the city of Keri, which serves as an entrepot, and from which place they were formerly in the habit of proceeding to Gaba, at a distance of 20 days' journey, and thence to Palestina, in Syria. But at a later period, as Juba informs us, they began to take the road, for the purposes of this traffic, to Charax and the kingdom of the Parthians. For my own part, it would appear to me that they were in the habit of importing these commodities among the Persians, even before they began to convey them to Syria or Egypt. At least Herodotus bears testimony to that effect, when he states that the Arabians paid a yearly tribute of 1,000 talents, in frankincense, to the kings of Persia. From Syria they bring back storax, which, burnt upon the hearth, by its powerful smell dispels that loathing of their own perfumes with which these people are affected. For in general there are no kinds of wood in use among them, except those which are odoriferous. Indeed, the Sabai are in the habit of cooking their food with incense wood, while others, again, employ that of the myrrh tree, and hence, the smoke and smells that pervade their cities and villages are no other than the very same which, with us, proceed from the altars. For the purpose of qualifying this powerful smell, they burn storax in goatskins, and so fumigate their dwellings. So true it is, that there is no pleasure to be found, but what the continual enjoyment of it begets loathing. They also burn this substance to drive away the serpents, which are extremely numerous in the forests which bear the odoriferous trees. Chapter 41. Why Arabia was called happy. Arabia produces neither cinnamon nor cassia, and this is the country styled Happy Arabia. False and ungrateful does she prove herself in the adoption of this surname, which she would imply to have been received from the gods above, whereas, in reality, she is indebted for it far more to the gods below. It is the luxury which is displayed by man, even in the paraphernalia of death, that has rendered Arabia thus happy, and which prompts him to burn with the dead what was originally understood to have been produced for the service of the gods. Those who are likely to be the best acquainted with the matter, assert that this country does not produce, in a whole year, so large a quantity of perfumes as was burnt by the Emperor Nero at the funeral obsequies of his wife Poppaea. And then let us only take into account the vast number of funerals that are celebrated throughout the whole world each year, and the heaps of odors that are piled up in honor of the bodies of the dead, the vast quantities, too, that are offered to the gods in single grains. And yet, when men were in the habit of offering up to them the salted cake, they did not show themselves any the less propitious. Nay, rather, as the facts themselves prove, they were even more favorable to us than they are now. But it is the Sea of Arabia that has even a still greater right to be called happy, for it is this that furnishes us with pearls. At the very lowest computation, India, the Ceres, and the Arabian Peninsula withdraw from our empire 100 millions of sesterces every year. So dearly do we pay for our luxury and our women. How large a portion, too, I should like to know, of all these perfumes, really comes to the gods of heaven, and the deities of the shades below. Chapter 42. Cinnamomum, Xylocinnammum. Fabulous antiquity, and Herodotus more particularly, have related that cinnamomum and cassia are found in the nests of certain birds, and principally that of the phoenix, in the districts where Father Liber was brought up, and that these substances either fall from the inaccessible rocks and trees in which the nests are built, in consequence of the weight of the pieces of flesh which the birds carry up, or else are brought down by the aid of arrows loaded with lead. It is said, also, that cassia grows around certain marshes, but is protected by a frightful kind of bat armed with claws, and by winged serpents as well. All these tales, however, have been evidently invented for the purpose of enhancing the prices of these commodities. Another story, too, bears them company, to the effect that under the rays of the noonday sun, the entire peninsula exhales a certain indescribable perfume composed of its numerous odors, that the breezes as they blow from it are impregnated with these odors, and indeed were the first to announce the vicinity of Arabia to the fleets of Alexander the Great, while still far out at sea. All this, however, is false, for cinnamomum or cinnamon, which is the same thing, grows in the country of the Ethiopians, who are united by intermarriages with the troglodyte. These last, after buying it of their neighbors, carry it over vast tracts of sea, upon rafts, which are neither steered by rudder, nor drawn or impelled by oars or sails. Nor yet are they aided by any of the resources of art, man alone, and his daring boldness, standing in place of all these. In addition to which they choose the winter season, about the time of the equinox, for their voyage, for then a south-easterly wind is blowing. These winds guide them in a straight course from gulf to gulf, and after they have doubled the promontory of Arabia, the north-east wind carries them to a port of the Gebanati, known by the name of Ocilia. Hence it is that they steer for this port in preference, and they say that it is almost 5 years before the merchants are able to effect their return, while many perish on the voyage. In return for their wares, they bring back articles of glass and copper, cloths, buckles, bracelets, and necklaces. Hence it is that this traffic depends more particularly upon the capricious tastes and inclinations of the female sex. The cinnamon shrub is only 2 cubits in height, at the most, the lowest being no more than a palm in height. It is about 4 fingers in breadth, and hardly has it risen 6 fingers from the ground, before it begins to put forth shoots and suckers. It has then all the appearance of being dry and withered, and while it is green it has no odor at all. The leaf is like that of wild marjoram, and it thrives best in dry localities, being not so prolific in rainy weather. It requires also to be kept constantly clipped. Though it grows on level ground, it thrives best among tangled brakes and brambles, and hence it is extremely difficult to be gathered. It is never gathered unless with the permission of the god, by whom some suppose Jupiter to be meant. The Ethiopians, however, call him a Sabanus. They offer the entrails of 44 oxen, goats, and rams, when they implore his permission to do so, but after all, they are not allowed to work at it before sunrise or after sunset. A priest divides the branches with a spear, and sets aside one portion of them for the god, after which, the dealer stores away the rest in lumps. There is another account given, which states that a division is made between the gatherers and the sun, and that it is divided into 3 portions, after which lots are twice drawn, and the share which falls to the sun is left there, and forthwith ignites spontaneously. The thinnest parts in the sticks, for about a palm in length, are looked upon as producing the finest cinnamon. The part that comes next, though not quite so long, is the next best, and so on downwards. The worst of all is that which is nearest the roots, from the circumstance that in that part there is the least bark, the portion that is the most esteemed. Hence it is that the upper part of the tree is preferred, there being the greatest proportion of bark there. As for the wood, it is held in no esteem at all, on account of the acrid taste which it has, like that of wild marjoram. It is known as xylocinamum. The price of cinnamomum is 10 denarii per pound. Some writers make mention of 2 kinds of cinnamon, the white and the black. The white was the one that was formerly preferred, but now, on the contrary, the black is held in the highest estimation, and the mottled even is preferred to the white. The most certain test, however, of the goodness of cinnamon is its not being rough, and the fact that the pieces when rubbed together do not readily crumble to powder. That which is soft is more particularly rejected, which is the case, also, when the outer bark too readily falls off. The right of regulating the sale of the cinnamon belongs solely to the king of the Gebanati, who opens the market for it by public proclamation. The price of it was formerly as much as 1,000 denarii per pound, which was afterwards increased to half as much again, in consequence, it is said, of the forests having been set on fire by the barbarians, from motives of resentment. Whether this took place through any injustice exercised by those in power, or only by accident, has not been hitherto exactly ascertained. Indeed, we find it stated by some authors, that the south winds that prevail in these parts are sometimes so hot as to set the forests on fire. The Emperor Vespasianus Augustus was the first to dedicate in the temples of the capital and the goddess peace chaplets of cinnamon inserted in embossed gold. I myself once saw in the temple of the Palatium, which his wife Augusta dedicated to her husband the late Emperor Augustus, a root of cinnamon of great weight, placed in a patera of gold. From it drops used to distill every year, which congealed in hard grains. It remained there until the temple was accidentally destroyed by fire. Chapter 43. Cassia. Cassia is a shrub also, which grows not far from the plains where cinnamon is produced, but in the mountainous localities. The branches of it are, however, considerably thicker than those of cinnamon. It is covered with a thin skin rather than a bark, and contrary to what is the case with cinnamon, it is looked upon as the most valuable when the bark falls off and crumbles into small pieces. The shrub is 3 cubits in height, and the colors which it assumes are threefold. When it first shoots from the ground for the length of a foot, it is white. After it has attained that height, it is red for half a foot, and beyond that it is black. This last is the part that is held in the highest esteem, and next to it the portion that comes next, the white part being the least valued of all. They cut the ends of the branches to the length of 2 fingers, and then sow them in the fresh skins of cattle that have been killed expressly for the purpose, the object being that the skins may putrefy, and the maggots generated thereby may eat away the woody parts, and so excavate the bark, which is so intensely bitter, that it is quite safe from their attacks. That which is the freshest is the most highly esteemed. It has a very delicate smell, and is so extremely hot to the taste, that it may be said to burn the tongue, rather than gradually warm the mouth. It is of a purple color, and though of considerable volume, weighs but very little in comparison. The outer coat forms into short tubes which are by no means easily broken. This choice kind of cassia, the barbarians call by the name of lauda. There is another sort, again, which is called balsamodes, because it has a smell like that of balsam, but it is bitter, for which reason it is more employed for medicinal purposes, just as the black cassia is used for unguents. There is no substance known that is subject to greater variations in price. The best qualities sell at 50 denarii per pound, others again at 5. To these varieties the dealers have added another, which they call daphnoids, and give it the surname of isocinnamon. The price at which it sells is 300 denarii per pound. It is adulterated with storax, and, in consequence of the resemblance of the bark, with very small sprigs of laurel. Cassia is also planted in our part of the world, and indeed at the extreme verge of the empire, on the banks of the river Rhenus, where it flourishes when planted in the vicinity of hives of bees. It has not, however, that scorched color which is produced by the excessive heat of the sun, nor has it, for the same reason, a similar smell to that which comes from the south. Chapter 44. Cankermum and Tarum. From the confines of the country which produces cinnamon and cassia, cankermum and tarum are imported, but these substances are brought by way of the Nabatean troglodyte, a colony of the Nabatii. Chapter 45. Sericatum and Gabalium. Thither, too, are carried sericatum and gabalium, aromatics which the Arabians rear for their own consumption, and which are only known by name in our part of the world, though they grow in the same country as cinnamon and cassia. Still, however, sericatum does reach us occasionally, and is employed by some persons in the manufacture of unguents. It is purchased at the rate of 6 denarii per pound. Chapter 46. Myrobalanum. In the country of the troglodyte, the Thebais, and the parts of Arabia which separate Judea from Egypt, myrobalanum is commonly found. It is provided by nature for unguents, as from its very name would appear. From its name, also, it is evident that it is the nut of a tree, with a leaf similar to that of the heliotropium, which we shall have to mention when speaking of the herbs. The fruit of this tree is about the size of a filbert. The kind that grows in Arabia is known as Sirioca, and is white, while, on the other hand, that which grows in the Thebais is black. The former is preferred for the quality of the oil extracted from it, though that which is produced in the Thebais yields it in larger quantities. Among these various kinds, that which is sent from the country of the troglodyte is the worst of all. There are some persons who prefer that of Ethiopia to all of these, the nut of which is black, and not oleaginous. It has only a very small kernel, but the liquid which is extracted from it is more odoriferous than that of the other kinds. It grows, too, in a champaign, open country. It is said that the Egyptian nut is even more oleaginous, being of a reddish color with a thicker shell, and that the plant, although it grows in wet, marshy spots, is shorter and drier than the other kinds. The Arabian nut, again, is said to be of a green color and of smaller size, but harder and more compact, from the circumstance that it grows in mountainous districts. The best of all, however, is that of Petra, which comes from a city mentioned on a previous occasion. It has a black shell, but the kernel is white. The perfumers, however, only extract the juices from the shells, but medical men pound the kernels, pouring warm water on them, little by little, as they do it. Chapter 47. Phoenicobalanus. The fruit of the palm in Egypt, which is known by the name of adipsos, is put to a similar use in unguents, and is held next in esteem after the myrobalanum. It is of a green color, has exactly the smell of a quince, and has no stone or nut within. It is gathered a little before it begins to ripen. That which is left ungathered is known as phoenicobalanus. It turns black, and has a tendency to inebriate the person who eats of it. The price of myrobalanum is 2 denarii per pound. The shopkeepers give this name also to the dregs of the unguent that is made with it. Chapter 48. The sweet-scented calamus, the sweet-scented rush. Scented calamus also, which grows in Arabia, is common to both India and Syria, that which grows in the last country being superior to all the rest. At a distance of 150 stadia from the Mediterranean, between Mount Libanus and another mountain of no note, and not, as some have supposed, anti-Libanus, there is a valley of moderate size, situate in the vicinity of a lake, the marshy swamps of which are dried up every summer. At a distance of 30 stadia from this lake grow the sweet-scented calamus and rush. We shall here make some further mention of this rush as well, although we have set apart another book for plants of that description, seeing that it is our object here to describe all the different materials used for unguents. These plants differ in appearance in no respect from others of their kind, but the calamus, which has the more agreeable smell of the two, attracts by its odor at a considerable distance, and is softer to the touch than the other. The best is the kind which is not so brittle, but breaks into long flakes, and not short like a radish. In the hollow stalk there is a substance like a cobweb, which is generally known by the name of the flower. Those plants which contain the most of it are esteemed the best. The other tests of its goodness are its being of a black color, those which are white not being esteemed, besides which, to be of the very best quality, it should be short, thick, and pliant when broken. The price of the scented calamus is 11, and of the rush 15 denarii per pound. It is said that the sweet-scented rush is to be met with also in Campania. Chapter 49. Hammoniacum. We have now departed from the lands which look towards the ocean to enter upon those which have an aspect towards our seas. Africa, which lies below Ethiopia, distills a tear-like gum in its sands, called Hammoniacum, the name of which has passed to the oracle of Hammon, situate near the tree which produces it. This substance, which is also called metopion, bears a strong resemblance to a resin or a gum. There are 2 kinds of ammoniacum, that to which the name is given of throston, and which bears a resemblance to male frankincense, being the kind that is the most esteemed, and that which is known as phyrama, being of an unctuous and resinous nature. This substance is adulterated by means of sand, which has all the appearance of having adhered to it during its growth. Hence it is greatly preferred when the pieces are extremely small, and in the purest state possible. The price of Hammoniacum of the best quality is 40 asses per pound. Chapter 50. Sphagnos. Below these countries, and in the province of Cyrenaica, The perfume called sphagnose is found in the highest state of perfection. There are some who call it by the name of Brian. The sphagnose of Cyprus holds the second rank, and that of Phoenicia the third. It is said that this plant is produced in Egypt also, and in Gaul as well, and I see no reason to doubt that such is the fact, for this name is given to certain white shaggy tufts upon trees, such as we often see upon the quercus. Those, however, of which we are speaking, emit a most exquisite odor. The most esteemed of all are the whitest, and those situate at the greatest height upon the tree. Those of second quality are red, while those which are black are not of the slightest value. The sphagnose, too, that is produced on islands and among rocks, is held in no esteem, as well as all those varieties which have the odor of the palm tree, and not that which is so peculiarly their own. Chapter 51. Cyprus. The cypress is a tree of Egypt, with the leaves of the ziziphus, and seeds like coriander, white and odoriferous. These seeds are boiled in olive oil, and then subjected to pressure. The product is known to us as cyprose. The price of it is 5 denarii per pound. The best is that produced on the banks of the Nile, near Canopus, that of second quality coming from Ascalon in Judea, and the third in estimation for the sweetness of its odor, from the island of Cyprus. Some people will have it that this is the same as the tree which in Italy we call ligustrum. Chapter 52. Aspelothos, or Erysiceptrum. In the same country, too, grows aspelothos, a white, thorny shrub, the size of a moderate tree, and with flowers like the rose, the root of which is in great request for unguents. It is said that every shrub over which the rainbow is extended is possessed of the sweet odor that belongs to the aspelothos, but that if the aspelothos is one of them, its scent is something quite indescribable. Some persons call this plant Erysiceptrum, and others, again, Septrum. The proof of its genuineness is its red or fiery color. It is also compact to the touch, and has the smell of castoreum. It is sold at the rate of 5 denarii per pound. Chapter 53. Maron. In Egypt too grows morum, though of inferior quality to that of Lydia, which last has larger leaves, covered with spots. Those of the other are shorter and smaller, and give out a powerful scent. Chapter 54. Balsamum, Upper balsamum, and xylobalsamum. But to all other odors that of balsamum is considered preferable, a plant that has been only bestowed by nature upon the land of Judea. In former times it was cultivated in 2 gardens only, both of which belonged to the kings of that country. One of them was no more than 20 jugera in extent, and the other somewhat smaller. The emperors Vespasianus and Titus had this shrub exhibited at Rome. Indeed, it is worthy of signal remark, that since the time of Pompeius Magnus, we have been in the habit of carrying trees even in our triumphal processions. At the present day this tree pays us homage and tribute along with its native land, but it has been found to be of altogether a different nature to that which our own as well as foreign writers had attributed to it, for in fact, it bears a much stronger resemblance to the vine than to the myrtle. This recent acquisition by conquest has learned, like the vine, to be reproduced by mallet shoots, and it covers declivities just like the vine, which supports its own weight without the aid of stays. When it puts forth branches it is pruned in a similar manner, and it thrives by being well raked at the roots, growing with remarkable rapidity, and bearing fruit at the end of 3 years. The leaf bears a very considerable resemblance to that of rue, and it is an evergreen. The Jews vented their rage upon this shrub just as they were in the habit of doing against their own lives and persons, while on the other hand, the Romans protected it. Indeed, combats have taken place before now in defense of a shrub. At the present day, the reproduction of it has become a duty of the fiscal authorities, and the plants were never known to be more numerous or of larger growth. They never exceed the height, however, of a couple of cubits. There are 3 different kinds of balsamum. The first has a thin and hair-like foliage, and is known by the name of euthariston. The second is of a rugged appearance, bending downwards, full of branches, and more odoriferous than the first. The name of this is trachea. The third kind is the eumeces, so called, because it is taller than the others. It has a smooth, even bark. It is the second in quality, the euthariston being inferior to the trachea. The seed of this plant has a flavor strongly resembling that of wine. It is of a reddish color, and not without a certain amount of unctuousness. The grains of inferior quality are lighter in weight and of a greener hue. The branches of the shrub are thicker than those of the myrtle. Incisions are made in it either with glass, or else a sharp stone, or knives made of bone, it being highly injurious to touch the vital parts with iron, for in such case it will immediately wither away and die. On the other hand, it will allow of all the superfluous branches being pruned away with an instrument of iron even. The hand of the person who makes the incision is generally balanced by an artificial guide, in order that he may not accidentally inflict a wound in the wood beyond the bark. A juice distills from the wound, which is known to us as opobalsamum. It is of extraordinary sweetness, but only exudes in tiny drops, which are then collected in wool, and deposited in small horns. When taken from out of these, the substance is placed in new earthen vessels. It bears a strong resemblance to a thick oil, and is of a white color when fresh. It soon, however, turns red, and as it hardens loses its transparency. When Alexander the Great waged war in those parts, it was looked upon as a fair summer day's work to fill a single conchus with this liquid, the entire produce of the larger garden being 6 congii, and of the smaller one a single congius. The price, too, at which it was sold was double its weight in silver. At the present day the produce of a single tree, even, is larger. The incisions are made 3 times every summer, after which the tree is pruned. The cuttings, too, form an article of merchandise. The 5th year after the conquest of Judea, these cuttings, with the suckers, were sold for the price of 800,000 sesterces. These cuttings are called xylobalsamum, and are boiled down for mixing with unguents, and in the manufactories have been substituted for the juices of the shrub. The bark is also in great request for medicinal purposes, but it is the tears that are so particularly valuable, the seed holding the second rank in estimation, the bark the third, and the wood being the least esteemed of all. Of the wood, that kind which resembles boxwood is considered the best. It has also the strongest smell. The best seed is that which is the largest in size and the heaviest in weight. It has a biting or rather burning taste in the mouth. Balsamum is adulterated with hypericon from Petra, but the fraud is easily detected, from the fact that the grains of the latter are larger, comparatively empty, and longer than those of balsamum. They are destitute also of any pungency of smell, and have a flavor like that of pepper. As to the tears of balsamum, the test of their goodness is their being unctuous to the touch, small, of a somewhat reddish color, and odoriferous when subjected to friction. That of second-rate quality is white, the green and coarse is inferior, and the black is the worst of all, for, like olive oil, it is apt to turn rancid when old. Of all the incisions, the produce is considered the best of those from which the liquid has flowed before the formation of the seed. In addition to what has been already stated, it is often adulterated with the juice of the seed, and it is with considerable difficulty that the fraud is detected by a slight bitterness in the taste, which ought to be delicate and without the slightest mixture of acidity, the only pungency being that of the smell. It is adulterated also with oil of roses, of cypress, of mastic, of balanus, of turpentine, and of myrtle, as also with resin, galbanum, and Cyprian wax, just as occasion may serve. But the very worst adulteration of all is that which is effected with gum, a substance which is dry when emptied into the hand, and falls to the bottom when placed in water, both of which are characteristics of the genuine commodity. Balsamum, in a genuine state, should be quite hard, but when it is mixed with gum a brittle pellicle forms upon it. The fraud can also be detected by the taste, and when placed upon hot coals it may easily be seen if there has been any adulteration with wax and resin. The flame too, in this case, burns with a blacker smoke than when the balsamum is pure. When mixed with honey its qualities are immediately changed, for it will attract flies even in the hand. In addition to these various tests, a drop of pure balsamum, if placed in lukewarm water, will settle to the bottom of the vessel, whereas, if it is adulterated, it will float upon the surface like oil, and if it has been drugged with metopion or hammoniacum, a white circle will form around it. But the best test of all is, that it will cause milk to curdle, and leave no stain upon cloth. In no commodity are there practiced more palpable frauds than in this, for a sextarius of balsamum which is sold by the fiscal authorities at 300 denarii, is sold again for 1,000, so vast is the profit to be derived from increasing this liquid by sophistication. The price of xylobalsamum is 6 denarii per pound. Chapter 55. Storax. That part of Syria joining up to Judea, and lying above Phoenicia, produces storax, which is found in the vicinity of Gabola and Marathus, as also of Casius, a mountain of Seleucia. The tree bears the same name, and has a strong resemblance to the quince. The tare has a harsh taste, with a pleasant smell. In the interior it has all the appearance of a reed, and is filled with a liquid juice. About the rising of the dog-star, certain small winged worms hover about this substance and eat it away, for which reason it is often found in a rotten state, with wormholes full of dust. The storax next in estimation after that already mentioned, comes from Pisidia, Sidon, Cyprus, and Cilicia, that of Crete being considered the very worst of all. That which comes from Mount Amanus, in Syria, is highly esteemed for medicinal purposes, and even more so by the perfumers. From whatever country it comes, that which is of a red color is preferred, and it should be both unctuous as well as viscous to the touch. The worst kind is that which crumbles like bran, and is covered all over with a whitish mold. This substance is adulterated with the resin of cedar or with gum, and sometimes with honey or bitter almonds, all which sophistications may, however, be detected by the taste. The price of storax of the best quality is 17 denarii per pound. It comes also from Pamphylia, but this last is more arid, and not so full of juice. Chapter 56. Galbanum. Syria produces galbanum too, which grows upon the same mountain of Amanus. It exudes from a kind of giant fennel of the same name as the resin, though sometimes it is known as stagonitis. The kind that is the most esteemed is cartilaginous, clear like hammoniacum, and free from all ligneous substances. Still, however, it is sometimes adulterated with beans, or with sarcopenium. If ignited in a pure state, it has the property of driving away serpents by its smoke. It is sold at 5 denarii per pound, and is only employed for medicinal purposes. Chapter 57. Panax. Syria, too, furnishes panax, an ingredient used in unguents. This plant grows also at Psophis in Arcadia, about the sources of the Erymanthus, in Africa also, and in Macedonia. This is a peculiar kind of giant fennel, which stands 5 cubits in height. It first throws out 4 leaves, and then 6, which lie close to the ground round, and of very considerable size. Those, however, which grow towards the top resemble the leaves of the olive. It bears its seed in certain tufts, which hang down, just as in the fennel. The juice is obtained by incisions made in the stalk at harvest time, and in the root in autumn. When in a coagulated state, it is esteemed according to its whiteness. The next in value is that of a pallid color, while the black is held in no esteem. The price of that of the best quality is 2 denarii per pound. Chapter 58. Spondylium. The difference between this kind of giant fennel and that known as spondylium consists only in the leaf, which is smaller, and divided like that of the plane tree. It grows in shady places only. The seed bears the same name as the plant, and has a strong resemblance to that of heartwort. It is only employed in medicine. Chapter 59. Malabathrum. Syria produces the malabathrum also, a tree which bears a folded leaf, with just the color of a leaf when dried. From this plant an oil is extracted for unguents. Egypt produces it in still greater abundance, but that which is the most esteemed of all comes from India, where it is said to grow in the marshes like the lentil. It has a more powerful odor than saffron, and has a black, rough appearance, with a sort of brackish taste. The white is the least approved of all, and it very soon turns musty when old. In taste it ought to be similar to nard, when placed under the tongue. When made lukewarm in wine, the odor which it emits is superior to any other. The prices at which this drug ranges are something quite marvelous, being from 1 denarius to 400 per pound. As for the leaf, it generally sells at 60 denarii per pound. Chapter 60. Omphacium. Omphacium is also a kind of oil, which is obtained from 2 trees, the olive and the vine, by 2 different methods. It is produced from the former by pressing the olive while it is still in the white state. That is of an inferior quality which is made from the druppa, such being the name that is given to the olive before it is ripe and fit for food, but already beginning to change its color. The difference between them is, that the latter kind is green, the former white. The omphacium that is made from the vine is extracted from either the Scythian or the Ammonian grape, when the grapes are about the size of a chickpea, just before the rising of the dog-star. The grape is gathered when the first bloom is appearing upon it, and the verjuice is extracted, after which the residue is left to dry in the sun, due precautions being taken against the dews of the night. The verjuice, after being collected, is put into earthen vessels, and then, after that, stored in jars of Cyprian copper. The best kind is that which is of a reddish color, acrid, and dry to the taste. The price at which it sells is 6 denarii per pound. Omphacium is also made another way. The unripe grape is pounded in a mortar, after which it is dried in the sun, and then divided into lozenges. Chapter 61. Bryan, Enanth, and Mossaries. Bryan also bears an affinity to these substances, being the clusters of berries produced by the white poplar. The best kinds grow in the vicinity of Cnidus, or in Curia, in spots that are destitute of water, or else in dry and rugged localities. A Bryan of second-rate quality is produced from the cedar of Lycia. Enanth, too, bears an affinity to these substances, being the clusters of the wild vine. It is gathered when it is in flower, or in other words, when it has the finest smell, after which it is dried in the shade upon a linen sheet spread beneath it, and then stored away in casks. The best sort is that which comes from Parapotamia. The next best kinds are those made at Antiochia and Laodicea in Syria, and that of third-rate quality comes from the mountainous parts of Media. This last, however, is preferable for medicinal purposes. Some persons give the preference over all to that grown in the island of Cyprus. As to that which comes from Africa, it is solely used for medicinal purposes, being known by the name of Mossaries. Whatever country it may happen to be, the white wild vine produces an enanth of superior quality to the black. Chapter 62. Elate or Spathe. There is another tree also, that contributes to the manufacture of unguents, by some persons known under the name of elate, but which we call abies. Others again call it a palm, and others give it the name of spatha. That of Hammonium is the most esteemed, and that of Egypt next, after which comes the Syrian tree. It is only odoriferous, however, in places that are destitute of water. The tares of it are of an unctuous nature, and are employed as an ingredient in unguents, to modify the harshness of the oil. Chapter 63. Cinnamon or Comicum. In Syria, too, is produced that kind of cinnamon which is also known as comicum. This is a juice which is extracted from a nut, and very different from the extract of the real cinnamomum, though it somewhat resembles it in its agreeable smell. The price at which it sells is 40 asses per pound.